Cleopatra's childhood, the girl who became queen. The Mediterranean Sea is silent. Moonlight dances across the dark waters. Far in the distance, a towering beacon shines into the night. The Lighthouse of Alexandria, one of the greatest wonders of the ancient world. Its flame can be seen for miles, guiding sailors safely to Egypt's most magnificent city. But tonight, our story is not about the lighthouse. It is not about the pyramids. It is not about the mighty pharaohs who built monuments that would survive for thousands of years. Tonight, our story begins with a child, a little girl born inside a palace of marble and gold, a princess whose name would echo through history long after kingdoms disappeared. Her name was Cleopatra. History remembers her as a queen, a seductress, a politician, a ruler, a legend. But before she became one of the most famous women who ever lived, she was simply a child trying to survive. To understand Cleopatra, we must travel back to Alexandria nearly 2,100 years ago. The year is approximately 69 BC. Egypt is rich. Egypt is powerful. Yet beneath the surface, the kingdom is crumbling. Its rulers are no longer Egyptian. For nearly 3 centuries, Egypt has been controlled by a Greek dynasty. The descendants of Alexander the Great, these rulers call themselves pharaohs. They wear Egyptian crowns. They perform Egyptian ceremonies. But in reality, they are foreigners. And among them, a young princess is growing up. She cannot know it yet. But one day, she will face the greatest empire the world has ever seen. One day she will challenge Rome itself. One day she will become the last true ruler of ancient Egypt. But first, she must survive her childhood. Chapter 1. A Palace of Secrets. The royal palace of Alexandria stretches across the waterfront. Its halls are filled with statues, fountains, gardens, and treasures from across the known world. Servants hurry through corridors carrying food and wine. Guards stand watch beneath torchlight. Musicians perform for nobles. Scholars debate philosophy. To an outsider, it appears magnificent. But appearances can be deceiving. Behind these walls lies a dangerous truth. The royal family is divided. Brothers distrust sisters. Parents distrust children. Power is everything. And power often comes at the end of a knife. The Ptolemaic dynasty has a long history of betrayal. Murder is not unusual. Conspiracies are common. Family members frequently fight for the throne. Young Cleopatra grows up surrounded by these tensions. Even as a child, she learns an important lesson. Trust can be deadly. Imagine being a young princess walking through marble halls, while knowing that your own relatives might one day become your enemies. This is the world that shapes Cleopatra, the world that teaches her to observe, to listen, to think. While other children play games, Cleopatra learns survival. Every conversation matters. Every alliance matters. Every decision matters. And somewhere in the shadows, the future queen is already learning how power works. Chapter 2. The City of Alexander. Alexandria is unlike any city on Earth. Founded by Alexander the Great centuries earlier, it has become a center of learning and culture. Ships arrive from Greece, from Rome, from Africa, from Arabia, from India. Languages mix in crowded markets. Merchants sell exotic goods from distant lands. Scholars gather to exchange ideas. The city never truly sleeps. Young Cleopatra is fortunate to grow up in this remarkable place. Unlike many royal children, she is exposed to people from different cultures, different religions, different languages, different ways of thinking. This exposure shapes her future. It helps explain why she becomes one of the most educated rulers of the ancient world. But Alexandria is more than a city. It is a symbol of knowledge, a symbol of ambition, a symbol of power, and for a young girl with extraordinary intelligence, it becomes the perfect classroom. The lessons she learns here will eventually help her negotiate with generals, kings, and emperors. The world outside the palace is becoming her teacher, and she is paying attention. Chapter 3. The Father of Cleopatra. Cleopatra's father is King Ptolemy XII. History remembers him as a weak ruler. His nickname is Auletes, the flute player. Some historians believe the nickname was meant as an insult. Many Egyptians dislike him. Many nobles distrust him. His position is constantly threatened. To maintain power, he relies heavily on Rome. This dependence creates resentment throughout Egypt. As Cleopatra watches her father struggle, she witnesses something important. A ruler without strength cannot command respect. A ruler without support cannot survive. These lessons leave a deep impression on the young princess. She sees the mistakes her father makes. She sees the consequences. And she quietly begins forming her own ideas about leadership. One day, she will do things differently. One day, she will become far more capable than the king she now watches from a distance. But she is still a child. And the storm approaching Egypt is only beginning. Chapter 4. The World's Greatest Library. Part 1. The Birth of Knowledge. The sun rises slowly over Alexandria. Golden light spills across the Mediterranean Sea, illuminating the bustling harbor of Egypt's greatest city. Merchant vessels from Greece glide toward the docks. Ships from Phoenicia unload exotic cargo. Roman traders negotiate prices with Egyptian merchants. The city awakens with the sounds of commerce, conversation, and ambition. Yet among all the wonders of Alexandria, one place stands above the rest. One institution symbolizes humanity's endless hunger for knowledge, the Great Library. To understand Cleopatra's childhood, we must first understand the world that surrounded her. Ancient Alexandria was not merely a city. It was the intellectual capital of the ancient world, a place where scholars gathered from distant kingdoms, a place where ideas crossed borders, a place where knowledge was treasured as highly as gold. The story begins nearly 3 centuries before Cleopatra's birth. After the death of Alexander the Great, his vast empire fractured into competing kingdoms. One of Alexander's generals, Ptolemy, seized control of Egypt. Rather than simply ruling his new kingdom through military power, Ptolemy envisioned something extraordinary. He wanted Alexandria to become the center of civilization itself. He wanted the city to surpass Athens, to surpass Babylon, to surpass every center of learning that had ever existed. To achieve this goal, he launched one of the most ambitious intellectual projects in human history, the creation of the Great Library. Imagine walking through Alexandria during its golden age. Towering marble buildings line broad avenues. Temples rise toward the sky. Markets overflow with goods from every corner of the known world. But beyond the marketplaces and palaces stands a remarkable complex dedicated to learning. Within its walls are countless scrolls, works by philosophers, poets, scientists, historians, mathematicians, explorers. Every ship arriving in Alexandria is said to have been searched for books and manuscripts. When texts were discovered, scribes copied them. The copies were returned. The originals often remained. The library's collection continued to grow, year after year, generation after generation. Some ancient sources claim the library held hundreds of thousands of scrolls. Whether those numbers are accurate remains uncertain. Yet there is no doubt that the library represented one of humanity's greatest attempts to gather all knowledge into a single place. For young Cleopatra, This environment was transformative. Although historians cannot say exactly how much time she spent inside the library itself, she grew up in a city shaped by its influence. The library's scholars taught members of the royal family. Its ideas influenced government policy. Its intellectual culture permeated Alexandria. Knowledge was respected. Education was valued. Curiosity was encouraged. And among all the royal children, Cleopatra possessed a remarkable curiosity. As a child, she asked questions, many questions. Questions about history, questions about distant lands, questions about the stars above Alexandria, questions about how rulers gained power and why kingdoms fell. Her tutors quickly recognized her intelligence. She absorbed information rapidly. She remembered details others forgot. She connected ideas in unexpected ways. The education she received was unlike anything available to ordinary children. While most young people learned practical skills for daily survival, Cleopatra studied literature, philosophy, mathematics, geography, and politics. She learned not only what people believed, but why they believed it. This distinction would later make her an extraordinary ruler. Many leaders rely on tradition. Many simply repeat what previous generations taught them. Cleopatra developed a deeper understanding. She sought reasons, patterns, connections. The scholars of Alexandria encouraged this approach. They believed knowledge advanced through questioning, through investigation, through observation. These principles influenced Cleopatra throughout her life. In later years, Roman writers would focus heavily on her beauty and charisma. Yet ancient sources repeatedly mention another quality, her intelligence. Those who met Cleopatra often commented on her conversation, her wit, her ability to discuss complex subjects. These abilities did not appear magically when she became queen. They originated during childhood. They originated in Alexandria. They originated in a city where learning was considered a noble pursuit. As the years passed, the young princess continued her studies. Each lesson expanded her understanding of the world. Each scroll revealed new possibilities. Each teacher opened another door. The child wandering the halls of Alexandria could not know her future. She could not know that she would one day negotiate with Julius Caesar. She could not know that she would challenge Rome itself. But the foundation was already being built. The future queen was learning. The future queen was preparing. And the world's greatest library was helping shape one of history's most remarkable women. The story of Cleopatra's education had only just begun. Part 2. Entering the House of Knowledge. The morning air of Alexandria carried the scent of salt from the Mediterranean. Ships crowded the harbor. Merchants shouted prices in dozens of languages. Priests walked through temple courtyards. Scholars debated philosophy beneath marble columns. And somewhere inside the royal district, a young princess was beginning another day of study. Cleopatra's childhood was unlike that of most children in the ancient world. While ordinary Egyptian children learned family trades, farming, fishing, weaving, or craftsmanship, Cleopatra's education was designed to prepare her for something much greater. She was a member of the royal family. Every lesson mattered. Every tutor had a purpose. Every subject was chosen carefully. For the Ptolemaic dynasty, education was not simply about knowledge, it was about power. Knowledge gave rulers an advantage. A king who understood politics could maintain control. A queen who understood diplomacy could build alliances. A ruler who understood history could avoid repeating the mistakes of the past. And so Cleopatra's teachers demanded excellence. The young princess was expected to master subjects that many adults found difficult. Ancient sources suggest she possessed exceptional intelligence. More importantly, she possessed curiosity. She wanted to know more. She wanted to understand how the world worked. This curiosity made her different. Many royal children studied because they were required to. Cleopatra studied because she wanted to learn, Imagine the royal district of Alexandria. White marble gleams beneath the Egyptian sun. Statues of gods and heroes line broad avenues. Gardens filled with rare plants stretch across palace grounds. Fountains sparkle in the light. The city appears almost magical. Yet beyond the beauty lies something even more valuable: knowledge. Alexandria had become a magnet for scholars. Mathematicians traveled from Greece. Astronomers arrived from distant lands. Physicians came to study medicine. Philosophers gathered to exchange ideas. The city attracted some of the brightest minds in the known world. Young Cleopatra grew up surrounded by these intellectual influences. She heard conversations about science. She listened to debates about government. She encountered ideas from cultures far beyond Egypt. Each encounter expanded her understanding. Each discussion challenged her thinking. The future queen was being shaped by one of the most advanced educational environments of the ancient world. The great library stood at the center of this intellectual universe. Although modern historians continue to debate the exact appearance of the library, ancient descriptions paint a remarkable picture. Large halls filled with scrolls, reading rooms crowded with scholars, storage chambers containing works collected from across continents, gardens designed for study and reflection, lecture spaces where ideas could be shared. To ancient visitors, it must have seemed like the physical embodiment of human knowledge. For Cleopatra, it represented opportunity, a place where questions could find answers, a place where learning never ended, a place where the boundaries of knowledge continued expanding. The library's mission was ambitious. Its founders hoped to collect every important text in existence, every poem, every historical account, every scientific observation, every philosophical work. The goal was nothing less than preserving the intellectual achievements of humanity. This vision transformed Alexandria into a global center of learning. Students traveled great distances to study there. Researchers came seeking answers. Writers came seeking inspiration. And royal tutors drew upon the library's resources when educating the next generation of rulers. Cleopatra benefited enormously from this environment. While she may not have spent every day wandering library corridors, she lived within its sphere of influence. Its knowledge flowed into palace classrooms. Its scholars taught royal children. Its ideas shaped political thinking throughout the kingdom. In many ways, the library became an invisible teacher in Cleopatra's life. One lesson especially fascinated her: history, the stories of past kingdoms, the rise of great rulers, the collapse of powerful empires. History taught valuable lessons. It revealed patterns. It showed how ambition could build nations. It showed how arrogance could destroy them. Cleopatra studied Alexander the Great. Like every member of the Ptolemaic dynasty, she understood the importance of his legacy. Alexander had conquered vast territories before dying young. His achievements transformed the ancient world. His name inspired loyalty, admiration, and fear. For Cleopatra, Alexander represented possibility, proof that one individual could change history, proof that leadership mattered, proof that destiny was not always determined by birth. These lessons stayed with her. Years later, when facing overwhelming challenges, she would draw upon the examples of great leaders from the past. She had spent years studying them, learning from their successes, learning from their failures. Another subject captured her imagination: geography. Ancient maps fascinated scholars of Alexandria. The known world stretched from Britain to India, from the deserts of Africa to the mountains of Asia. Trade routes connected distant civilizations. Ships crossed dangerous seas. Caravans traveled across deserts. Explorers returned with stories of strange lands and unfamiliar peoples. Cleopatra absorbed these accounts eagerly. The wider world fascinated her. Many rulers rarely looked beyond their own borders. Cleopatra wanted to understand the entire world around her. This global perspective would later prove invaluable. As queen, she would negotiate with foreign leaders, interact with merchants from many nations, respond to threats from powerful empires. Her childhood education prepared her for these responsibilities. The more she learned, the more she realized how interconnected the world truly was. Egypt depended on trade. Trade depended on diplomacy. Diplomacy depended on understanding different cultures. Knowledge created power. The lesson appeared again and again, and Cleopatra never forgot it. As evening approached, Alexandria transformed. The heat of the day faded. Torches illuminated streets and courtyards. The harbor glowed beneath moonlight. Conversations continued long into the night. Scholars debated ideas. Merchants negotiated agreements. Philosophers questioned accepted truths. The city never stopped thinking, never stopped learning, never stopped searching for answers. For a young princess with an active mind, Alexandria was the perfect place to grow. Every day offered new discoveries. Every lesson revealed new possibilities. Every question led to another question. The future queen was becoming more than a royal child. She was becoming a thinker, a student, a strategist, a leader in training. And while she could not yet see the challenges waiting ahead, the education she received was quietly preparing her for them. Far beyond the palace walls, powerful forces were beginning to reshape the ancient world. Rome was growing stronger. Political tensions were increasing. The stability of Egypt was becoming uncertain. Soon, Cleopatra's childhood would become far more dangerous. Soon, knowledge alone would not be enough. But for now, the young princess continued her studies, surrounded by books, surrounded by teachers, surrounded by one of the greatest intellectual traditions humanity had ever created. The great Library of Alexandria was teaching her a lesson she would carry for the rest of her life. A ruler's greatest weapon is not a sword. It is the mind. And Cleopatra's mind was becoming one of the sharpest in the ancient world. Part 3. The Scholars Who Shaped a Queen. Night settles over Alexandria. The great harbor glitters beneath thousands of torchlights. Ships rock gently against their moorings. The distant beam of the famous lighthouse sweeps across the dark waters of the Mediterranean. Inside the city, life continues. Merchants count their profits. Priests perform sacred rituals. Soldiers patrol the streets. And in halls filled with scrolls and ideas, scholars continue their endless search for knowledge. This is the Alexandria of Cleopatra's childhood, a city where intelligence is respected, a city where ideas travel farther than armies, a city where a curious young princess finds herself surrounded by some of the brightest minds in the ancient world. For generations, Alexandria had attracted scholars from every corner of civilization. Some came seeking answers. Others came seeking fame. Many came because no other city offered so much knowledge in one place. Together, they transformed Alexandria into the intellectual capital of the ancient world. Young Cleopatra may never have realized just how fortunate she was. Most children grew up hearing stories from family members. Cleopatra grew up in a city where philosophers debated the nature of reality, astronomers measured the movement of planets, physicians studied the human body, and mathematicians explored mysteries hidden within numbers. Everywhere she looked, there were people searching for truth, and every one of them had something to teach. One of the most respected subjects in Alexandria was astronomy. For thousands of years, humans had looked toward the heavens with wonder. The stars seemed eternal. The moon followed predictable cycles. The planets wandered mysteriously across the sky. Ancient Egyptians had long studied celestial movements. Their calendars depended upon them. Their religious ceremonies were linked to them. Their understanding of seasons relied upon them. In Alexandria, astronomers pushed this knowledge even further. Night after night, they observed the heavens. They recorded patterns. They compared observations made across generations. They sought order in the apparent chaos of the universe. Imagine young Cleopatra standing on a palace terrace after sunset. Above her stretches an endless canopy of stars. The Milky Way glows faintly across the darkness. The moon illuminates the city below. Beside her, a teacher points toward the heavens. This star rises at the same time every year. That constellation guides sailors. Those wandering lights are planets. The child listens carefully. Questions fill her mind. What are stars? Why do planets move? How large is the world? How far do the heavens extend? These questions fascinate her. They encourage imagination. They encourage curiosity. Most importantly, they encourage critical thinking. The habit of asking questions becomes one of Cleopatra's defining characteristics. Another field flourishing in Alexandria is mathematics. To many people, mathematics seems cold and abstract. But to ancient scholars, mathematics reveals hidden truths about reality itself. Numbers explain architecture. Numbers explain trade. Numbers explain astronomy. Numbers explain engineering. The great buildings of Alexandria require mathematical precision. The lighthouse itself stands as proof of human ingenuity. Engineers calculate measurements. Builders determine angles. Architects design structures capable of withstanding powerful storms and earthquakes. Everything depends upon knowledge. Everything depends upon understanding. As Cleopatra studies mathematics, she learns an important lesson. Complex problems often have solutions, but finding those solutions requires patience, discipline, logic. These skills later prove invaluable. Politics, like mathematics, often involves solving difficult problems. A queen must evaluate information, weigh possibilities, predict outcomes, choose the best course of action. The foundations of these abilities begin during childhood, begin in classrooms, begin with lessons that seem simple at first, but gradually reshape the way a person thinks. Medicine is another area where Alexandria excels. The city attracts physicians eager to advance their understanding of the human body. Some study injuries suffered by soldiers. Others investigate diseases. Still others experiment with treatments and remedies. Ancient medicine remains limited compared to modern science, but Alexandria becomes one of the leading centers of medical learning. Knowledge accumulates. Techniques improve. Ideas spread. For Cleopatra, exposure to medical knowledge offers another valuable lesson. Leadership involves responsibility. A ruler must care for the health and well-being of a kingdom. A prosperous nation depends upon healthy citizens. A strong army depends upon healthy soldiers. Understanding medicine means understanding people, and understanding people is essential for effective leadership. Perhaps the most influential scholars in Alexandria are the philosophers. These thinkers ask difficult questions. What makes a good ruler? What creates justice? What is truth? What is virtue? How should power be used? Such questions have no easy answers. Yet they are among the most important questions a future queen can consider. Philosophers challenge assumptions. They encourage debate. They demand evidence. They teach students to defend their ideas through reason rather than emotion. For a young princess destined to navigate dangerous political landscapes, these lessons are invaluable. One teacher might argue that rulers must be wise. Another insists they must be strong. A third claims they must be just. Cleopatra listens, learns, reflects. Over time, she develops her own understanding of leadership, not simply repeating what others believe, not blindly following tradition, but forming independent judgments based on observation and experience. This intellectual independence later becomes one of her greatest strengths. Many rulers depend entirely on advisors. Cleopatra values advisors, but she also thinks for herself. She questions, analyzes, decides. The habits formed during childhood remain with her throughout life. Meanwhile, historians in Alexandria preserve stories from the past. They record battles, treaties, dynasties, triumphs, disasters. Their work allows future generations to learn from earlier generations. For Cleopatra, history becomes a treasure chest filled with lessons. She studies successful rulers. She studies failed rulers. She examines the decisions that built empires and the mistakes that destroyed them. Again and again, history reveals the same truth. Power is never permanent. Every kingdom rises. Every kingdom falls. Every ruler eventually faces challenges. The question is not whether challenges will come. The question is how a leader responds. This lesson becomes especially important as Egypt's political situation grows increasingly unstable. Even during Cleopatra's childhood, signs of trouble are appearing. Rome is becoming more powerful. Economic pressures are increasing. Internal rivalries threaten stability. The future remains uncertain, but Cleopatra is preparing. Every lesson strengthens her mind. Every conversation expands her understanding. Every book broadens her perspective. While many members of the royal family focus on luxury and privilege, Cleopatra focuses on learning. She recognizes something others often overlook. Knowledge creates opportunities. Knowledge creates influence. Knowledge creates power. As years pass, teachers begin noticing her unusual abilities. She remembers details with remarkable accuracy. She understands complex ideas quickly. She asks insightful questions. Most importantly, she connects information from different subjects. History informs politics. Geography informs trade. Philosophy informs leadership. Languages inform diplomacy. Nothing exists in isolation. Everything connects. This ability to see relationships between ideas later helps Cleopatra navigate one of the most dangerous periods in Egyptian history. She will face rivals, civil wars, Roman intervention, economic crises, military threats. Yet, again and again, she demonstrates an ability to adapt, an ability to learn, an ability to think strategically. The foundations of those abilities are being built now. Inside classrooms, inside libraries, inside conversations with scholars. Far beyond the palace walls, most people know nothing of the young princess's education. They see only another royal child, another member of the ruling family, another figure destined to enjoy wealth and privilege. They cannot see what is happening beneath the surface. The shaping of an extraordinary mind. The development of a future queen. The formation of a leader who will one day stand against the greatest power on earth. The scholars of Alexandria may never fully realize the impact of their teachings, yet through their lessons, their debates, and their ideas, they are helping shape one of history's most famous rulers. The city itself becomes a teacher. Its libraries teach curiosity. Its scholars teach wisdom. Its philosophers teach reason. Its historians teach perspective. Its astronomers teach wonder. Its mathematicians teach logic. Together, they create an environment unlike any other in the ancient world. An environment where a young princess can become something extraordinary. As midnight approaches, Alexandria grows quieter. The harbor settles. The markets close. The palace sleeps. But in the mind of Cleopatra, questions continue. Ideas continue. Dreams continue. The future queen is still learning. And somewhere beyond the horizon, destiny is waiting. Waiting for the moment when knowledge will be tested. waiting for the moment when lessons become action, waiting for the day when the girl studying in Alexandria becomes the woman who will change history. Number Chapter 5. Number, the girl who loved languages. The city of Alexandria never spoke with a single voice. From sunrise to sunset, thousands of conversations echoed through its streets. Greek merchants bargained in crowded marketplaces. Egyptian priests chanted sacred prayers inside ancient temples. Roman traders negotiated contracts at busy docks. Sailors arriving from distant lands shouted commands from the decks of their ships. The sounds blended together into a living symphony. To most people, the mixture of languages was simply part of daily life. To a young princess named Cleopatra, it was something far more important. It was a doorway into different worlds, different cultures, different ways of thinking, different ways of understanding reality itself. Long before she became queen, Cleopatra developed an unusual fascination with language. Words intrigued her. Voices fascinated her. The ability to communicate with different people seemed almost magical. Most members of the Ptolemaic royal family remained isolated within their Greek-speaking world. They ruled Egypt, but many never truly connected with the people they governed. For generations, the dynasty had maintained a cultural distance from ordinary Egyptians. Greek remained the language of power. Greek remained the language of government. Greek remained the language of the royal court. Many rulers saw no reason to learn anything else. Cleopatra would become different, and that difference began during childhood. Every day, she encountered evidence that language held power. When ambassadors arrived from foreign kingdoms, translators often stood between them and the royal court. Messages passed through multiple voices before reaching their destination. Meaning could be lost. Intentions could be misunderstood. Trust could disappear. The young princess noticed these problems. She saw how misunderstanding created confusion. She saw how communication created opportunity. She began to understand a simple truth. Those who controlled communication often controlled outcomes. It was a lesson she would never forget. As a child, Cleopatra spent countless hours with tutors. Some taught history. Some taught mathematics. Others focused on literature and philosophy. But language occupied a special place in her education. Ancient writers later claimed Cleopatra mastered numerous languages. The exact number remains debated by historians. Yet even skeptical scholars agree that her linguistic abilities were exceptional. For a ruler of the ancient world, this talent was extraordinarily valuable. Most monarchs relied heavily on interpreters. Cleopatra often preferred direct conversation. That ability gave her an advantage few leaders possessed. But every remarkable skill begins somewhere, and Cleopatra's journey began with Greek. Greek was the language of her family, the language of her ancestors, the language of Alexander the Great, the language of scholars, philosophers, and administrators. From an early age, she learned to read and write Greek with precision. She studied poetry. She studied philosophy. She studied speeches delivered by famous leaders. Her teachers emphasized clarity. They emphasized persuasion. They emphasized elegance. Language was not merely a tool for communication. It was an art. Words could inspire armies. Words could calm crowds. Words could shape history. The more Cleopatra learned, the more she appreciated the power hidden within language. Ancient Greek literature introduced her to heroes and legends. She read stories of courage, stories of ambition, stories of triumph and tragedy. She encountered great thinkers whose ideas continued influencing the world centuries after their deaths. Every scroll opened a new window. Every text expanded her understanding. Every lesson sharpened her mind. Yet something else captured her attention. Beyond palace walls lived millions of Egyptians. They spoke a different language. They followed traditions older than Greece itself. They worshipped ancient gods. They viewed the world through a cultural lens, unlike anything found in the royal court. Many Ptolemaic rulers ignored this reality. Cleopatra did not. She became curious. She wanted to understand the people around her. She wanted to understand the kingdom she would one day help govern. That curiosity led her toward one of the most important decisions of her life. She learned Egyptian. Today, that choice might not seem extraordinary, but within the context of her dynasty, it was remarkable. For generations, Greek rulers had remained culturally separate from their Egyptian subjects. Few bothered learning the native language. Few attempted genuine integration. Cleopatra saw things differently. Language offered access. Language offered understanding. Language offered connection. When she learned Egyptian, she gained more than vocabulary. She gained insight into an ancient civilization. She gained access to traditions that stretched back thousands of years. She gained the ability to communicate directly with priests, officials, and ordinary people. Most importantly, she gained legitimacy. A ruler who speaks the language of the people demonstrates respect. A ruler who understands local traditions earns trust. These advantages would later strengthen Cleopatra's position as queen, but during childhood, the decision emerged from something simpler: curiosity, a desire to learn, a desire to understand. Imagine the young princess sitting with her tutors. One lesson focuses on Greek literature. The next focuses on Egyptian writing. The next introduces vocabulary from another region. Hours pass. Days pass. Years pass. Slowly, her abilities grow. Language after language expands her world. Each new language reveals different customs, different values, different assumptions, different perspectives. The process changes her. Many people spend their lives viewing the world through a single cultural lens. Cleopatra learns to see through multiple lenses. She begins understanding how different societies think, how different cultures solve problems, how different peoples interpret events. This flexibility becomes one of her greatest strengths. Leadership often requires empathy. Empathy often requires understanding, and understanding frequently begins with language. Alexandria itself provides constant opportunities for practice. The city serves as one of the busiest ports in the Mediterranean. Ships arrive daily. Merchants come and go. Diplomats travel through its streets. Languages echo from every direction. A curious child cannot help but notice. Cleopatra listens carefully. Sometimes she hears familiar Greek, sometimes Egyptian, sometimes languages she cannot identify. Rather than ignoring unfamiliar sounds, she becomes fascinated by them. Questions fill her mind. Where do these people come from? What stories do they tell? What do their words mean? How do they see the world? Questions lead to learning. Learning leads to understanding, and understanding leads to influence. Years later, Roman historians would write extensively about Cleopatra. Many focused on her beauty. Many focused on her relationships. But several ancient sources emphasized something else: her voice, her conversation, her intelligence. The Greek historian Plutarch described her ability to engage people through speech. He suggested her charm came not merely from appearance, but from the quality of her conversation. This observation reveals something important. Cleopatra's greatest strength may never have been physical beauty. It may have been communication. She knew how to speak. She knew how to listen. She knew how to adapt her words to different audiences. Such abilities do not appear overnight. They develop slowly. They develop through study, through observation, through practice, and through a genuine love of language. As Cleopatra grew older, her education became increasingly sophisticated. Her tutors introduced rhetoric, the art of persuasion, the art of influencing others through words. Ancient societies valued rhetoric highly. Courts depended upon it. Politics depended upon it. Diplomacy depended upon it. Leaders who communicated effectively gained advantages over rivals. The young princess studied famous speeches. She examined successful arguments. She analyzed persuasive techniques. Why did some speakers inspire loyalty? Why did others fail? Why did crowds follow certain leaders? Why did they reject others? The answers fascinated her. Language, she discovered, was not simply about exchanging information. Language shaped emotions. Language shaped perceptions. Language shaped decisions. Those who mastered rhetoric possessed tremendous power. Cleopatra intended to master it. Hour after hour, she practiced. Sentence after sentence, she refined her skills. Argument after argument, she strengthened her understanding. The process required discipline, patience, determination, but the rewards proved enormous. By adulthood, she could speak with confidence before powerful audiences. She could negotiate with foreign leaders. She could persuade allies. She could challenge opponents. Her words became weapons, not weapons of destruction, weapons of influence, weapons of leadership, weapons capable of changing history. Yet perhaps the most important lesson language taught, Cleopatra involved listening. Many people focus on speaking. Few appreciate the value of listening. The young princess learned both. She listened to scholars. She listened to merchants. She listened to priests. She listened to diplomats. She listened to ordinary citizens whenever opportunities arose. Every conversation contained information. Every voice offered perspective. Every story revealed something valuable. This habit of listening broadened her understanding of Egypt and the wider world. It helped her recognize problems before they became crises. It helped her identify opportunities others overlooked. It helped her understand human nature. And understanding human nature would become essential for survival, because beyond the palace walls, powerful forces were gathering. Rome continued expanding. Political rivalries intensified. Economic pressures increased. The stability of Egypt became increasingly uncertain. Soon, Cleopatra's abilities would face serious tests. Soon, knowledge would become necessity. Soon, communication would become a matter of survival. But during these formative years, she remained a student, a curious child, a princess determined to understand the world around her. Every language she learned expanded that world. Every conversation deepened her insight. Every lesson strengthened her future. The girl who loved languages was becoming something extraordinary. Not merely a scholar, not merely a princess, but a future queen, uniquely prepared to navigate one of the most dangerous periods in ancient history. And she was only beginning her journey. Chapter 6. The Palace of Betrayal. The royal palace of Alexandria shimmered beneath the morning sun. From a distance, it appeared magnificent. White marble reflected golden light. Fountains sparkled within elegant courtyards. Servants hurried through grand halls carrying trays of fruit, wine, and precious goods from distant lands. Musicians performed for noble guests. Guards stood watch beside bronze gates. To outsiders, the palace represented wealth, power, and stability. It looked like the safest place in Egypt, but appearances can be deceiving. Behind the polished marble and luxurious decorations, another reality existed. A darker reality. A dangerous reality. A reality filled with ambition, fear, jealousy, and betrayal. This was the world of Cleopatra's childhood, a world where smiles often concealed hidden motives, a world where family members became rivals, a world where power mattered more than love, a world where survival required intelligence. The young princess was growing up in one of the most dangerous households in the ancient world, and she was beginning to understand it. The Ptolemaic dynasty had ruled Egypt for nearly 3 centuries. Their family traced its origins to one of Alexander the Great's most trusted generals. After Alexander's death, his empire fragmented. Ptolemy seized Egypt and established a dynasty that would endure for generations. At first, the kingdom flourished. Alexandria became one of the greatest cities in the world. Trade expanded. Knowledge flourished. The kingdom accumulated enormous wealth, but beneath the prosperity lurked a persistent problem. The royal family was obsessed with power. Generation after generation, succession disputes erupted. Brothers fought brothers. Sisters fought sisters. Children plotted against parents. Parents distrusted children. Murder became a political tool. Suspicion became a way of life. The palace itself became a battlefield. Not a battlefield of swords and shields, a battlefield of secrets. The young Cleopatra did not fully understand these dangers at first. Like many children, she initially viewed the world through innocent eyes. She admired powerful figures. She trusted familiar faces. She assumed adults knew what they were doing. But childhood innocence rarely survives long inside a palace, especially a palace like this. As Cleopatra grew older, she began noticing things. Whispers stopped when she entered a room. Servants exchanged nervous glances. Court officials carefully chose their words. Meetings occurred behind closed doors. Conversations suddenly changed direction whenever certain individuals approached. Something was wrong. Even a child could sense it. The palace seemed calm, yet tension existed everywhere. It flowed through corridors like an invisible river. People smiled, but they did not trust one another. People bowed, but they did not respect one another. People praised loyalty, yet constantly prepared for betrayal. Slowly, Cleopatra learned one of history's oldest truths. Power changes people. The desire for power changes them even more. Her father, King Ptolemy XII, occupied the center of this unstable world. Officially, he ruled one of the richest kingdoms in existence. In reality, his position was fragile. Many Egyptians disliked him. Many nobles questioned his leadership. Many advisors secretly doubted his competence. The king's dependence upon Rome made matters worse. For decades, Rome had grown increasingly powerful. What began as a republic on the Italian peninsula was transforming into a Mediterranean superpower. Kingdom after kingdom fell under Roman influence. Egypt remained independent, but only barely. Ptolemy XII relied heavily upon Roman support to maintain his throne. He paid enormous sums of money to secure Roman protection. To some observers, it appeared as though Egypt's king was purchasing his own survival. This dependence damaged his reputation. Many Egyptians viewed it as weakness. Many nobles viewed it as humiliation. Many rivals viewed it as opportunity. The young Cleopatra watched these developments carefully. At first, she may not have fully understood their significance, but she understood enough to recognize danger. She understood enough to recognize uncertainty. Most importantly, she understood enough to realize that a throne offered no guarantees. A king could lose power. A queen could lose influence. A dynasty could lose everything. The realization was unsettling, yet it became one of the most valuable lessons of her life. Elsewhere within the palace, rivalries among siblings intensified. Royal children rarely enjoyed ordinary family relationships. Every child represented a potential claimant to power. Every birth altered political calculations. Every alliance shifted the balance. Cleopatra's sisters and brothers occupied a world shaped by competition. Some sought attention. Others sought influence. Still, others sought advantage. The atmosphere encouraged suspicion. Trust became difficult. Affection became complicated. Ambition overshadowed everything. Among Cleopatra's siblings, one figure would become particularly important. Her older sister, Berenice. Berenice possessed intelligence. She possessed ambition. Most importantly, she possessed a claim to power. As dissatisfaction with King Ptolemy increased, individuals searching for alternatives began paying attention to Berenice. The princess may have recognized this. The king certainly did. The possibility of rebellion no longer seemed impossible. Political instability was spreading. Economic problems contributed to the crisis. Although Egypt remained wealthy, wealth was not distributed equally. Taxes burdened ordinary people. Government finances faced increasing pressure. Roman demands drained resources. Corruption affected administration. Public frustration grew. In prosperous times, people often tolerate weak leadership. In difficult times, patience disappears. The kingdom was entering a dangerous period, and danger creates opportunity for ambitious individuals. Inside the palace, rumors multiplied. Officials discussed possible reforms. Advisors proposed solutions. Critics blamed the king. Supporters defended him. No consensus emerged. Only uncertainty. Cleopatra listened, observed, learned. Many children ignore politics. Cleopatra could not afford such luxury. Politics shaped her world. Politics determined who gained influence. Politics determined who survived. The princess began paying close attention. Every conversation offered information. Every argument revealed priorities. Every alliance exposed hidden motivations. She was learning how power operated, not from books, not from lectures, from experience. The lessons were harsh, but they were effective. One event especially affected the royal family: the mysterious disappearance of Cleopatra's mother. Historians continue debating exactly what happened. Ancient sources provide incomplete information. Some records suggest death. Others suggest political removal. The truth remains uncertain. For Cleopatra, however, uncertainty may have been the most painful aspect. A mother who disappears leaves questions behind. Questions without answers. Questions that linger for years. Questions that shape a child's understanding of the world. The loss reinforced an important lesson. Life inside the palace was unpredictable. Security could vanish suddenly. People could disappear. Circumstances could change overnight. Nothing was guaranteed, not even family. As months passed, tensions increased further. Public dissatisfaction intensified. Rome's influence expanded. Political factions maneuvered for advantage. The kingdom drifted closer to crisis. And within the palace, the atmosphere grew increasingly toxic. Individuals chose sides. Alliances formed. Rivalries sharpened. Every decision carried consequences. Every mistake created risk. Cleopatra continued watching, continued learning, continued adapting. She developed habits that would define her later life: careful observation, strategic thinking, emotional control, patience. These qualities did not emerge naturally. They emerged because circumstances demanded them. A careless child might not survive palace politics. A naive princess might become a victim. Cleopatra refused to be either. The palace was becoming her classroom. Betrayal was becoming her teacher. And the lessons were only beginning. Far beyond Alexandria, Rome continued growing stronger. Within Egypt, opposition continued growing bolder. Within the royal family, ambitions continued growing sharper. A storm was approaching. Soon, it would transform Cleopatra's childhood forever. Soon, the palace would cease merely being a place of tension. It would become a place of open conflict. And the girl quietly observing events from the shadows would discover that survival required more than intelligence. It required courage. It required resilience. It required understanding human nature in all its complexity. The child studying languages and history was about to encounter a different kind of education. An education in betrayal. An education in power, an education in survival, the education of a future queen. Chapter 7. The King Who Lost Egypt. The city was angry. Alexandria had always been a city of noise. Merchants shouted in crowded markets. Sailors called to one another from ships in the harbor. Priests chanted inside ancient temples. Musicians performed in courtyards and banquet halls. But now a different sound was spreading through the streets. The sound of frustration. The sound of fear. The sound of a population losing faith in its ruler. For years, King Ptolemy XII had managed to remain on the throne despite criticism from nearly every direction. He relied heavily on Rome. He paid enormous sums of money to secure Roman support. He struggled to maintain stability inside Egypt. To many Egyptians, he appeared less like a powerful king and more like a ruler desperately trying to hold on to power. The situation worsened when Rome annexed Cyprus. The island had long been connected to the Ptolemaic dynasty. Many Egyptians expected their king to respond forcefully. They expected leadership. They expected strength. Instead, they saw hesitation. To critics, it looked like weakness. Public anger spread quickly. Every marketplace became a center of discussion. Every gathering became an opportunity for criticism. Citizens questioned their king. Officials questioned their king. Even members of the royal court questioned their king. The atmosphere grew increasingly dangerous. Inside the palace, Cleopatra sensed the change. She was still young, yet she was old enough to recognize tension. Old enough to recognize fear. Old enough to understand that something significant was happening. Servants whispered more frequently. Advisors appeared increasingly nervous. Meetings became more secretive. Messages arrived at unusual hours. The palace no longer felt secure. It felt uncertain, and uncertainty can be more frightening than open danger. The young princess watched carefully. Observation had become one of her greatest habits. She listened. She learned. She remained quiet while others spoke. The more she observed, the clearer the situation became. Her father's position was weakening. People no longer trusted him. People no longer believed he could protect Egypt. And when trust disappears, power often follows. The crisis deepened. Opposition groups grew bolder. Public demonstrations became more common. Political rivals sensed opportunity. Among those rivals stood a familiar figure. Berenice, Cleopatra's older sister. Berenice understood something important. A throne does not remain empty for long. If one ruler falls, another often rises. As support for Ptolemy declined, support for alternatives increased. Berenice became one of those alternatives. The possibility of rebellion transformed from rumor into reality. Within Alexandria, conversations shifted. People no longer asked whether change would come. They asked when. The answer arrived sooner than anyone expected. The pressure became unbearable. Facing overwhelming opposition, Ptolemy XII made a dramatic decision. He fled. The king of Egypt abandoned his kingdom. He left Alexandria. He left the palace. He left behind a nation in crisis. For ordinary Egyptians, the event was astonishing. For members of the royal family, it was life-changing. For Cleopatra, it was unforgettable. One day her father occupied the throne. The next day he was gone. A king had become an exile. A ruler had become a refugee. A monarch who once commanded Egypt now sought protection elsewhere. The lesson was impossible to ignore. Power was fragile, far more fragile than most people believed. The young princess watched her world transform almost overnight. The palace remained standing. The city remained standing. The kingdom remained standing. Yet everything had changed. The illusion of stability had vanished. In its place stood uncertainty, and uncertainty created opportunity. With Ptolemy gone, Berenice moved quickly. She positioned herself as ruler. She presented herself as the solution to Egypt's problems. For supporters, she represented change. For opponents, she represented danger. Regardless of opinion, one fact became clear. Berenice was now one of the most powerful individuals in Egypt. Cleopatra watched her sisters rise carefully. The experience offered valuable lessons. She saw how quickly fortunes changed. She saw how public opinion influenced political outcomes. She saw how ambitious individuals seized opportunities during moments of crisis. Most importantly, she learned that survival depended upon adaptation. Those who failed to adapt disappeared. Those who adapted endured. This lesson would guide her throughout her life. As months passed, Egypt entered a new era. Berenice ruled. Ptolemy remained in exile. Rome watched closely, and Cleopatra continued learning. The classroom had changed. The lessons had changed. The stakes had changed. Yet education continued. Now she studied politics not from books but from reality itself. She studied leadership through observation. She studied power through experience. She studied survival through necessity. The girl who once spent her days learning languages and history was receiving a new education, an education in crisis, an education in revolution, an education that would eventually prepare her for challenges far greater than anything she could imagine. Because beyond the horizon, her father's story was not finished. Rome had not made its final decision. Egypt's future remained uncertain, and the struggle for power was only beginning. The king had lost Egypt, but the battle for Egypt was far from over. Number chapter 8. Number the queen's sister, Berenice's reign. The throne of Egypt was no longer occupied by a king. For the first time in years, Alexandria found itself under the rule of a new monarch, not a foreign conqueror, not a Roman governor, not an elderly statesman, but a young woman. Her name was Berenice IV, the daughter of Ptolemy XII, the sister of Cleopatra, the woman who had seized an opportunity created by chaos. When King Ptolemy XII fled Egypt, he left behind more than an empty throne. He left behind uncertainty, fear, questions about the future, questions about survival, questions about who would lead one of the richest kingdoms in the ancient world. Into that uncertainty stepped Berenice. To many Egyptians, her rise seemed necessary. The king had abandoned his people. The kingdom still needed a ruler. The government still needed leadership. The army still needed direction. Without decisive action, Egypt risked descending into complete disorder. Berenice understood this. More importantly, she understood that power rarely waits for permission. Power belongs to those willing to seize it. And so she did. Inside the palace, reactions were mixed. Some celebrated the change. Others feared it. Still others simply waited to see what would happen next. Among those watching closely was Cleopatra. The future queen was still a young princess. Yet every event unfolding around her provided another lesson in politics, another lesson in ambition, another lesson in survival. For years, she had studied rulers in books. Now she was watching one emerge in real life. Berenice's reign began beneath the shadow of uncertainty. A crown may symbolize authority, but symbols alone cannot guarantee obedience. A ruler requires legitimacy, support, resources, allies. Without them, even the strongest throne becomes unstable. Berenice understood this challenge. She moved quickly to strengthen her position. Officials were reassigned. Alliances were negotiated. Supporters were rewarded. Potential threats were monitored. Every decision reflected a simple reality. Holding power is often more difficult than obtaining it. The palace became a center of constant activity. Messengers hurried through corridors. Advisors held private meetings. Military commanders discussed security. Political supporters sought influence. The atmosphere remained tense. Egypt's future was far from secure. Meanwhile, far from Alexandria, Ptolemy XII continued his efforts to reclaim the throne. Although exiled, he had not surrendered. The former king understood something crucial. Rome possessed the power to change everything. If Roman leaders supported his return, he might regain his kingdom. If they refused, his reign could be finished forever. And so the exiled monarch focused his attention on Rome. Back in Alexandria, Berenice faced her own challenges. Ruling a kingdom in crisis required more than ambition. It required competence. The economy remained fragile. Political divisions persisted. Public expectations remained high. Every success increased support. Every mistake created danger. The young queen walked a narrow path. One misstep could prove disastrous. Cleopatra observed everything. The palace had become her classroom once again. She watched how officials reacted to authority. She watched how alliances formed. She watched how public opinion shifted. Most importantly, she watched how power changed people. Individuals who once appeared loyal now pursued personal advantage. Friends became rivals. Supporters became critics. Political life revealed its true nature. It was unpredictable, complex, often ruthless. The lessons left a lasting impression. Years later, Cleopatra would remember them. She would remember how quickly circumstances changed, how fragile authority could be, how dangerous complacency became. Berenice's experience served as a warning. A throne offered prestige, but it also attracted enemies. As months passed, the queen attempted to strengthen her position through marriage. In the ancient world, marriage often served political purposes. Royal unions created alliances, secured support, improved legitimacy. For Berenice, marriage represented an opportunity to reinforce her rule. Yet the strategy produced complications. Political expectations rarely align perfectly with reality. The alliances she sought did not always deliver the benefits she expected. The difficulties highlighted an important truth. Even queens face limitations. Even rulers cannot control every outcome. Cleopatra noticed this as well. Leadership involved compromise, negotiation, adaptation. A ruler could issue commands, but commanding and controlling were not the same thing. The distinction mattered. Outside the palace, ordinary Egyptians continued their daily lives. Farmers cultivated fields along the Nile. Merchants sold goods in crowded markets. Craftsmen practiced their trades. Families focused on survival. Yet political developments affected everyone. Changes at the top eventually influenced life throughout the kingdom. People watched events carefully. They hoped for stability. They hoped for prosperity. They hoped the future would prove better than the past. Whether those hopes would be fulfilled remained uncertain. Meanwhile, Rome's shadow continued growing larger. Roman politicians discussed Egyptian affairs. Roman generals considered opportunities. Roman interests expanded across the Mediterranean. The fate of Egypt increasingly depended upon decisions made far beyond its borders. This reality troubled many Egyptians. Their kingdom remained independent, yet independence seemed increasingly fragile. Berenice ruled Egypt, but Rome influenced its future. The contradiction created tension, and tension created risk. For Cleopatra, these developments reinforced another lesson. Geography matters. Power matters. International politics matter. No kingdom exists in isolation. Even wealthy nations depend upon relationships with neighbors. Even powerful rulers must consider external threats. The world was larger than Egypt, much larger, and the future queen intended to understand it. As her education continued, Cleopatra combined formal learning with practical observation. Books taught theory, life taught reality. Together they created a powerful education. She learned from teachers. She learned from scholars. She learned from politicians. She learned from family members. Every experience contributed to her development. The young princess was becoming increasingly aware of the forces shaping history: ambition, fear, loyalty, greed, hope, power. These forces influenced individuals. They influenced governments. They influenced entire civilizations. Understanding them became essential, and Cleopatra was learning quickly. Yet despite all her observations, one reality remained impossible to ignore. Her father was still alive. The former king had not abandoned his ambitions. He had not accepted defeat. Somewhere beyond Egypt, he continued searching for a path back to power. The possibility haunted Berenice's reign. Every decision occurred beneath that shadow. Every policy carried uncertainty. Every success remained temporary. Because if Ptolemy returned with Roman support, everything could change. And history suggests that exiled rulers rarely forget those who replaced them. As the months passed, whispers spread through Alexandria. Rumors traveled through markets. Conversations filled palace corridors. Stories arrived from distant lands. The exiled king was negotiating. The exiled king was gathering allies. The exiled king was seeking assistance. No one knew exactly what would happen, but many suspected change was coming. For Cleopatra, the situation created mixed emotions. Berenice was her sister. Ptolemy was her father. The conflict was political, but it was also personal. Family and power had become inseparable. The distinction between loyalty and survival grew increasingly blurred. The princess watched, waited, learned. The story unfolding around her would shape the rest of her life, because the struggle between Berenice and Ptolemy was not merely a family dispute. It was a lesson about ambition, a lesson about legitimacy, a lesson about power, and most importantly, a lesson about survival. The queen's sister ruled Egypt, but her reign stood upon uncertain foundations. Beyond the horizon, forces were gathering. Rome was watching, Ptolemy was planning, and destiny was moving steadily toward Alexandria. Soon, the kingdom would face another turning point. Soon, the battle for Egypt would enter a new phase. And soon, Cleopatra would witness firsthand how quickly a crown could become a target. The education of a future queen was far from complete. In many ways, it was only beginning. Chapter 9. Rome decides Egypt's fate. The future of Egypt was no longer being decided in Alexandria. It was no longer being decided along the banks of the Nile. It was no longer being decided inside royal palaces or temple courtyards. The future of Egypt was being decided hundreds of miles away. In Rome, the most powerful city in the Mediterranean world, a city that had transformed itself from a regional republic into a rising superpower, a city whose decisions could determine the fate of kings, a city whose ambitions would eventually reshape the ancient world. For Cleopatra, Rome was still a distant place, a place she knew through lessons, maps, reports, and stories. Yet even as a young princess, she was beginning to understand an uncomfortable truth. Egypt remained wealthy. Egypt remained famous. Egypt remained independent. But Rome was becoming something larger, something stronger, something impossible to ignore. Years earlier, Roman influence had been significant. Now it was becoming overwhelming. Kingdoms across the Mediterranean increasingly found themselves dependent upon Roman approval. Alliances required Roman cooperation. Trade often required Roman support. Political survival frequently depended upon Roman goodwill. The balance of power was changing. And Egypt stood directly in the path of that change. Far from Alexandria, the exiled King Ptolemy XII understood this reality better than anyone. His throne was gone. His daughter Berenice ruled in his place. His authority had collapsed. His reputation had suffered. Yet he possessed one advantage. He was alive, and as long as he remained alive, he retained hope. Hope that Rome would help him reclaim what he had lost. Hope that powerful allies could restore him. Hope that exile was temporary. The former king devoted himself to a single objective: returning to Egypt, returning to power, returning to the throne. Achieving that goal would require influence, money, connections, and Rome possessed all three. The city itself overwhelmed visitors. Roman streets overflowed with activity. Politicians debated in public forums. Merchants conducted business from every corner of the Mediterranean. Soldiers marched through crowded avenues. Temples towered above bustling marketplaces. Everywhere, power seemed visible. Everywhere, ambition seemed present. The Roman Republic was entering one of the most dramatic periods in its history. Great political figures competed for influence. Powerful generals accumulated wealth and loyalty. Political alliances shifted constantly. The Republic remained strong. Yet tensions simmered beneath the surface. Future conflicts were already taking shape. Ptolemy entered this environment seeking assistance. He needed supporters. He needed protection. Most importantly, he needed Roman leaders willing to invest resources in restoring his rule. Fortunately for him, Egypt possessed something Rome valued greatly: wealth. The fertile Nile Valley generated enormous agricultural production. Egypt's grain supplies were vital. Its resources were significant. Its strategic position made it valuable. Control over Egypt represented opportunity. Roman politicians understood this. Roman generals understood this. Roman businessmen understood this. As a result, Egypt's fate attracted considerable attention. The exiled king spent years building relationships. He met influential figures. He negotiated agreements. He promised rewards. Ancient historians suggest enormous sums of money changed hands during these efforts: bribes, loans, political favors. The exact details remain debated, but one reality is clear: Ptolemy's restoration would not occur without cost. Every alliance required payment. Every promise created obligations. Every agreement carried consequences. The future king was purchasing support, and support in Rome rarely came cheaply. Back in Alexandria, Berenice remained on the throne. For the moment, she appeared secure. She governed Egypt. She commanded loyalty from supporters. She enjoyed the advantages of incumbency. Yet uncertainty lingered. Reports from Rome arrived periodically. Rumors circulated through political circles. Questions persisted. Would the Romans intervene? Would Ptolemy return? Would Egypt face invasion? No one knew. But many suspected change was coming. Among those paying close attention was Cleopatra. The young princess continued her education, yet politics increasingly became part of that education. The struggle between her father and sister offered lessons no classroom could provide. She watched how legitimacy could be challenged. She watched how power could shift. She watched how foreign influence affected domestic politics. Most importantly, she watched how survival often depended upon adaptability. The future queen absorbed every lesson. She understood that kingdoms were not isolated. Events in distant cities could transform life in Egypt. A decision made in Rome could affect millions living along the Nile. The world was interconnected, and understanding those connections mattered. As time passed, support for Ptolemy gradually strengthened. Influential Romans began viewing his restoration as beneficial. Political calculations shifted. Economic incentives aligned. Strategic considerations emerged. The possibility of intervention became increasingly realistic, yet Rome rarely acted quickly. Roman politics moved through debate, negotiation, competition. Different factions pursued different goals. Different leaders supported different strategies. Securing agreement required patience. Ptolemy waited, negotiated, persisted. Meanwhile, the situation inside Egypt remained fragile. Berenice continued ruling, but every month brought fresh uncertainty. The threat of Roman involvement hung over her government like a storm cloud. Supporters worried. Opponents speculated. Neutral observers prepared for multiple possibilities. No outcome seemed guaranteed. The atmosphere became increasingly tense. History often portrays major events as inevitable. In reality, they rarely feel inevitable while unfolding. Participants experience uncertainty, confusion, doubt. Cleopatra lived within that uncertainty. She could not predict the future. She could only observe the present. And the present suggested that Egypt's destiny was no longer entirely in Egyptian hands. Rome's influence had become too great. The realization carried profound implications. If Rome could restore kings, Rome could remove kings. If Rome could shape governments, Rome could dominate governments. The independence of smaller kingdoms was becoming increasingly fragile. These lessons remained with Cleopatra. Years later, when she encountered Roman leaders directly, she would remember them. She would remember how Roman power operated, how Roman interests shaped decisions, how Roman politics influenced foreign affairs. The education of a future ruler continued, not through books alone, but through observation of history in motion. As negotiations progressed, reports from Rome grew more serious. Military discussions began. Political support increased. The possibility of direct action became increasingly likely. The exiled king sensed momentum. His opportunity was approaching. His years of effort were producing results. His return no longer seemed impossible. It seemed probable. For Berenice, this development represented danger. For Egypt, it represented uncertainty. For Cleopatra, it represented another lesson. Power is never permanent. Every victory remains vulnerable. Every ruler faces challenges. Every throne attracts rivals. The story of her sister's reign was becoming a story of survival, and survival often depended upon forces beyond individual control. Far away in Rome, powerful men continued making decisions. In Alexandria, those decisions awaited their consequences. Soon, soldiers would march. Soon, alliances would be tested. Soon, Egypt would face a confrontation capable of changing its future forever. Rome was deciding Egypt's fate, and Egypt had little choice but to wait. Final chapter. The girl who became queen. The years of childhood were over. The lessons of Alexandria were complete. The young girl who once wandered palace corridors listening to scholars and watching politicians had changed forever. She had witnessed betrayal. She had witnessed exile. She had witnessed rebellion. She had witnessed the collapse of a king. She had witnessed the rise and fall of a queen. Most children learn about power from stories. Cleopatra learned about power from experience. The palace of her childhood had been more than a home. It had been a battlefield fought not with swords alone, but with ambition, fear, loyalty, and deception. Every crisis had taught her something. Every loss had strengthened her. Every danger had prepared her. As the years passed, Cleopatra emerged from childhood possessing qualities few rulers ever develop. She understood politics. She understood human nature. She understood the value of knowledge. Most importantly, she understood survival. These lessons would soon become essential. Because the Egypt she inherited was no longer the Egypt of earlier generations. Rome's shadow stretched across the Mediterranean. Foreign influence reached deeper into Egyptian affairs with every passing year. The independence of kingdoms was disappearing. The world was changing, and Cleopatra would soon find herself standing at the center of that change. The young princess had learned many things from the great library. She had learned languages. She had learned philosophy. She had learned history. But perhaps the most important lesson came from observing life itself. Knowledge alone was not enough. Wisdom required experience, and experience had arrived in abundance. The child who once studied ancient rulers now understood their struggles. She understood how quickly power could disappear, how dangerous success could become, how fragile even the strongest throne truly was. Many future rulers grow up protected from reality. Cleopatra did not. Reality entered her life early. It entered through political crises, through family rivalries, through uncertainty and fear. Yet those hardships became her greatest teachers. When her father lost his kingdom, she learned that authority could vanish. When her sister seized power, she learned that ambition could reshape history. When Rome intervened, she learned that foreign powers could determine the fate of nations. These lessons formed the foundation of her future leadership. Years later, historians would debate Cleopatra's appearance. They would debate her relationships. They would debate her political decisions. But one fact remains undeniable. She was remarkably prepared. Prepared not because life had been easy. Prepared because life had been difficult. Prepared because she had learned to adapt. Prepared because she had learned to think. Prepared because she had learned to survive. Soon she would become queen. Soon she would face civil war. Soon she would encounter Julius Caesar. Soon she would meet Mark Antony. Soon she would confront the growing power of Rome. Yet the seeds of those future events had already been planted. They had been planted during childhood, inside the halls of Alexandria, inside classrooms filled with scrolls, inside a palace filled with intrigue, inside a family torn apart by ambition. Every experience contributed to the woman she would become. Every challenge shaped her character. Every lesson sharpened her mind. And so the story of Cleopatra's childhood is not simply the story of a princess. It is the story of preparation, the story of education, the story of transformation, the story of a young girl learning how to navigate one of the most dangerous worlds imaginable, the world of kings and queens, the world of empires, the world of power. As the sun sets over Alexandria, imagine the young Cleopatra standing on a palace balcony. The Mediterranean stretches before her. Ships move across the harbor. The lighthouse shines in the distance. The city below buzzes with life. She does not yet know exactly what the future holds. She does not know the names that history will later give her. She does not know that her story will survive for more than 2,000 years. She is simply a young woman preparing for tomorrow. Yet history already waits for her. The future queen stands on the edge of destiny, and soon the world will know her name. Cleopatra, the last queen of Egypt, the most famous woman of the ancient world, the ruler who challenged Rome, the legend who would never be forgotten. But before she was any of those things, she was a child, a daughter, a sister, a student, a survivor, a girl who learned that knowledge is power, a girl who learned that survival requires courage, a girl who learned that greatness is rarely born. It is forged through struggle, forged through adversity, forged through experience. And in the royal palace of Alexandria, greatness was being forged. The girl had become ready. The queen was about to emerge. Cleopatra XII would go on to become one of the most influential rulers in ancient history. She ruled Egypt during one of the most turbulent periods of the ancient world. She formed alliances with Julius Caesar and later Mark Antony. She fought to preserve Egypt's independence against the rising power of Rome. After her defeat by Octavian, the future Emperor Augustus, Cleopatra died in 30 BC, marking the end of the Ptolemaic kingdom and the beginning of Roman Egypt. Yet her story remains alive more than 2,000 years later. Not because she was perfect, not because she always succeeded, but because she faced extraordinary challenges with intelligence, determination, and courage. Behind every legend is a beginning. Behind every queen is a child. And the story of Cleopatra's childhood reminds us that history's greatest figures were once ordinary people facing extraordinary circumstances. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this documentary, please like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more stories from the ancient world. Until next time, this is Xity Night History. Good night.